we recognize the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples on the land. Memory is inscribed upon the landscape. Montgomery's Inn stands on traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples.
Black and white photographs featuring rural life.
We acknowledge the historical absence and invisibility of Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, disabled people, and two-spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer plus people in the history of Montgomery's Inn.
White letters over a black background.
This project animates missing narratives, making visible Black and disabled people's contribution to that history. The experiences and agency of Black people and the absence of disability in historical records does not reflect the factual experiences of many Ontarians in the 19th century.
3 illustrations hang on a wall. One features a man with a cane. White letters over a black background.
How do we reread the inn's history?
A sketch of a black woman hangs on a wall.
One story is not the only story.
An exterior photo of the old Montgomery Tavern.
Thomas Montgomery was born in Ireland in 1790. He met his wife Margaret Dawson when he came to Canada at age 25. Montgomery's Inn was built for them around 1830.
White letters over a black background.
How do you remember someone you don't know? There are no photographs of Thomas and Margaret, so we don't know what they look like. These imagined silhouettes overlay Thomas's ledger books from the mid-1800s. In the 19th century, silhouettes were a popular form of portraiture before photography. One of the most well-known silhouette artists, Moses Williams, was a Black man who had escaped enslavement. There are also a number of disabled artists who travel the world creating and selling silhouettes. Martha Honeywell often produced silhouettes with scissors held in her mouth in public performances.
Now, inside Montgomery's Inn kitchen, a pot of soup boils over an open fire.
Margaret Montgomery was likely in charge of the kitchen, and with her employees would have prepared all the meals for the inn's customers, families, and laborers. They used vegetables and grain grown on the farm-raised cows and pigs, as well as sugar and spices imported over long distances via colonial trade routes.
A map with pushpins in it. Then sketches of a lady in a wheelchair. A man passes a jar of beer across the bar.
In the bar room, Thomas Montgomery sold a wide range of beverages, including wine, rum, cider, brandy, gin, ginger beer, and sarsaparilla. Beer and whiskey were the most popular and sold for 2 pennies a glass.
2 pennies are passed across the bar in exchange for a mug.
He also sold meals prepared in the kitchen alongside cheese and crackers, tobacco, and pipes. The bar room was a place for travelers and locals to drink, eat, do business, exchange ideas, and visit with each other. A place of warmth, shelter, and refuge. But not everyone was included in that warm welcome due to discriminatory laws.
A sketch of a black woman hangs on a wall.
An 1835 act prohibiting the sale of spirituous liquors to Indians was part of a series of policies aimed at controlling Indigenous people that specifically excluded them from tavern sociability.
A page of rules and regulations for innkeepers is pinned to a wall. Then, handwritten notes.
Montgomery's financial records identify individuals by name, describing characteristics sometimes based on race or nationality or language. Jesse Tibor, Frenchman. Or situational, like William Orton, the man that got hurt falling down into the cellar.
White letters over a black background.
So who else is missing? The census statistics for York Region in 1842 show headings for deaf, dumb, and insane persons, but the columns are empty, indicating that either there were no disabled people living in York at the time, or more likely, the collective attitudes around disability fostered an environment that did not consider their lives worth counting as part of the larger community.
A metal-tipped cane leans against a table.
What does a record show, and what does it hide? Researcher and historian Hilary Dawson notes that in the 1871 Etobicoke census, a person named Nicholas Howard is recorded as deaf and dumb, as well as idiot, unsound mind, which was the language used at the time to describe disability.
Now Montgomery's in dining room.
The dining room was used by the Montgomery family and also by travelers. Catered meals were served, which might include wheat bread, cheese, pies, preserves, meat and potatoes, served with tea and coffee and seasonal produce from the Montgomery farm. It was incredibly labor-intensive to run the farm, and over the years the household included many servants and farm laborers, including Joshua Glover. Joshua Glover was a black man who had escaped enslavement in St. Louis, Missouri in 1852 and made the perilous journey to Canada and Montgomery's Inn in 1854. Evidence of Glover's arrival at Montgomery's Inn can be found in Thomas Montgomery's account books, in which he entered Glover's loan. Joshua Glover, the Negro to cash, $15. Joshua Glover was not the only black person living in the area. Researcher Hilary Dawson notes that the 1842 census counted 11 black residents. The total population of Etobicoke was then about 2,500. By 1851, this number had increased to 39 black citizens.
A yellowed map of early Etobicoke.
Black people were members of the community. They worked as farmers, laborers, and craftspeople, and their families were part of Etobicoke's developing communities. While we don't know all of their names, we do know that John Spencer and William Jarvis were laborers. John Duncans and John Winston Skanks worked as carpenters and worked for Thomas Montgomery for 20 years. William Lafferty was a grocer, and his son, also named William, lived on a 50-acre farm with livestock, gardens, orchards, and 26 beehives.
White letters over a black background.
One story is not the only story.
Pages of sheet music sit on a cloth table. A black and white sketch of a black woman.
For over 20 years, Joshua Glover worked for Thomas Montgomery, cutting wood, harvesting crops, and doing various other jobs around the farm. He became a lifelong friend of the Montgomery's family. In Thomas Montgomery's ledgers, Joshua Glover is first referred to as Joshua Glover the Negro. Later, Joshua Glover the Colored Man. And finally, simply, Joshua Glover. When Thomas's son William took over the ledgers, his entries became much more familiar as Josh, Old Josh, and finally, Poor Old Josh. According to historian Hilary Dawson, when Joshua Glover died, William Montgomery tried to retrieve Glover's remains, but was unsuccessful. Joshua Glover was probably assured a good Christian burial, but after he died, his body was taken away and donated to the University of Toronto's medical school.
In a cemetery stands Montgomery's tall headstone. Then, inside Montgomery's Inn,
The Montgomery family may have used this room as a place to gather in the evening, to receive company, and perhaps as a private dining room.
a sketch of 3 black women hangs on a wall. Then a sketch of a black woman sweeping in front of a busy street.
So, who is missing?
In a large bedroom upstairs,
The first room up the steep stairs is furnished as a bedroom for William and Robert Montgomery. Given its size and location, this room was likely the bedroom of Mr. and Mrs. Montgomery. When the inn was being restored, a pair of wool twill work pants from the 1830s was found stuffed in the attic. The shape of the pants is reproduced here from a pattern by Joyce Hack. We're not sure why the pants were put in that space. Maybe to keep wildlife out, or perhaps they were deliberately concealed as a possible talisman against evil.
a wash basin and mirror sit in front of a bright window. Then a photograph in a metal frame sits on a fireplace mantel.
Margaret Montgomery died in 1855 at the age of 47. After her death, Thomas did not renew his innkeeper's license. This was typical, as wives of innkeepers were usually the main source of domestic labor, while the innkeepers themselves were often artisanal laborers or farmers.
Leaves hang off a door.
From Virginia Penny's book, The Employments of Women, a Cyclopedia of Women's Work, published in 1863. Women engaged in this business should be wives whose husbands can attend to receiving travelers, settling bills, ordering horses, and such duties, or widows with sons old enough to do so. It is laborious enough for a woman to superintend the table and bedrooms, and the man must be in wretched health or good for nothing that cannot attend to the outdoor duties.
Inside a small room,
This room was created when a wall was added, dividing one large room into two smaller rooms, perhaps to provide an additional bedroom when the Montgomery family was growing. History is formed of layered stories, which are often simplified, edited, redacted, and censored. We see that the walls in this very room have been layered with different materials under which hidden messages have been revealed. The messages found includes the names of John Clark, who was employed by Thomas Montgomery in 1838 to 39, and Samuel King, probably also an employee. There's also a drawing of a hand and the following quote, "The cry is never surrender," which was a motto of an Orange Lodge associated club known as the Apprentice Boys.
now in the dining room,
The diversity that we saw in the downstairs tavern may not have been extended to the upper bar parlor. This parlor was used as an exclusive club room for certain groups of men. They would gather in the late afternoon or early evening for a tavern meal, followed by drinks and merrymaking late into the evening.
a black and white photo of a woman hangs on the wall.
Adjacent to the parlor is a multi-purpose room that was used for dances, small concerts, fundraising auctions, meetings, and political campaigns. Montgomery's Inn served as the meeting place for the local Orange Lodge, Local 138. The Orange Lodge required that individuals must be at least 18 years old and a member of the Protestant Church. Members enjoyed access to social benefits and employment opportunities. The Orange Order explicitly opposed the immigration of Catholics and racialized people to Canada.
Leather boots rest on the floor.
Who else is missing? These 4 rooms fulfilled district bylaws requiring 3 rooms and 3 beds separate from the barroom, plus a sitting room for the use of travelers. Thomas Montgomery used these rooms as private living quarters after closing the inn. Thomas Montgomery died on November 8, 1877, at the age of 87, and he is buried in the Islington Burying Grounds, just west of Montgomery's Inn, with his wife and children.
An exterior photo of Montgomery's Inn.
How can we experience history when there is no access? Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, women, multi-generational immigrants, and disabled people were always here. So then, how do we remember someone we don't know? As a community, we are tangled in the constellation of stories. As a collective group, we can move the stories out of isolation and into a site of being, widening the edges of history.
White letters over a black background.
One story is not the only story. It is no longer acceptable to not have women at the table. It is no longer acceptable to not have people of color at the table. But no one thinks to see if the table is accessible. Judith E. Heumann, American disability rights activist.
End credits feature white letters over a black background. Created by Angelia Hughes, Ann Zabitnu, Charmaine Lurch, Ines Papagiannis, Reese Jones, Tom G. Lottie, Brian Allen Stewart, Fraser Collins, Brooke Robertson Pittman, Martin Huss, Time Cope, Dave Clark, Kate Hill, Hillary Dawson, Ian Walls, Courage My Love, Steve Hyman, David Widman, Andrew Belanger, American Sign Language Interpretation, Toronto Sign Language Interpreter Service Media, Kate Hill, Lauren McCallum, Acknowledgement, University of Toronto Libraries Repository, Thomas Fisher Rare Book Library, City of Toronto Museums and Heritage Services, produced with the support of the City of Toronto through the Toronto Arts Council.